writers can change people's minds, change people's lives, and sometimes even change the world. And here to bring you the stories of writers who rock, say hello to Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki, and I'm going to rock your world with the next 4 videos. Our first story is about a subject that's on everybody's minds these days, the environment. But it wasn't always on people's minds until a woman named Rachel Carson wrote a book that made people take a closer look at what we put into the air and how it affects wildlife and people. Carson tried to imagine a world with no birds singing, so she called her book Silent Spring. Check it out and think about how her message is relevant to us today.
Breath of fresh air. People used to think it was okay to spray all kinds of poisonous chemicals into the environment. But decades ago, one woman wrote a book that convinced the world to clean up its act. A biologist named Rachel Carson challenged the chemical industry and the government in her book, Silent Spring. It was written in the 1950s as America was waging a new kind of war, a war on bugs.
The real threat, then, to the survival of man is not chemical, but biological, in the shape of hordes of insects.
New chemical bug killers, pesticides, like DDT, were giving America the power to wipe out insects that destroy crops and spread disease. In 1959, 80 million pounds of DDT were sprayed on the United States. The government actually put on these demonstrations to prove the toxic chemical was safe. But evidence was piling up that they were wrong. Dead wrong. Birds and other wildlife were dying from DDT poisoning, and Rachel Carson knew she had to act.
The public was being asked to accept these chemicals and did not have the whole picture. So I set about to remedy the balance there.
She spent 4 years researching and writing her book, which explained that when we poison nature, we poison ourselves. Of course, not everyone agreed, especially the companies that sold the chemicals.
The major claims in Miss Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, are gross distortions of the actual facts.
But Rachel Carson had the facts right, and many powerful people were persuaded by her book, including President John F. Kennedy. It wasn't long before the public was, too. Within only 2 weeks, Silent Spring became a bestseller, changing the minds of millions. Soon the government began to limit the use of DDT, and 10 years later, it was banned completely. Rachel Carson's writing sparked a new awareness of how we treat the environment, and her activism inspired a generation of environmentalists determined to keep this from turning into this. It took just one woman and a few hundred pages to help clear the air.
You know where some people see ordinary streets and buildings and crowds? Other people see poetry? It's easy. Watch. I was walking down the street today listening to what people had to say. Okay, I'm no poet, but I'm working on it. Our next video is about 2 teens who are poets. They share one neighborhood, but they've each rocked it totally different ways. Let's take a walk through Harlem and ask ourselves, can writing poetry really make a difference in the world?
Living out loud.
People come from around the world to see the sights and feel the vibrant rhythms of Harlem, the historic New York City home of African-American writers and artists since the 1920s. The Harlem tradition continues for 2 young poets who are creating their own rhythms with poems inspired by life in the neighborhood they call home. Victor Cherry was once a gang leader and drug dealer, but he turned his life around and he turned to poetry, writing it, sharing it, and teaching it.
Today we're going to speak about poetry.
Victor shows other teens how to use poetry as a way to deal with the challenges of growing up on city streets.
When I write about my feelings, my emotions, my experience, and other people's experience. Just be prepared, because there are ups and downs, slips and falls. Just take it by the heart and mind. Then you will see life is all right. And what's not all right will turn out all right.
Victor's own world was rocked by violence.
My cousin Mark got murdered. That was really the turning point in my life.
After that tragedy, Victor vowed to change things in his neighborhood. So he started working with young kids, trying to steer them away from gangs and fighting.
If somebody gonna hit me, I'm gonna protect myself. But I'm not gonna be standing looking for no fight.
Victor's lived in Harlem his whole life, but now he's got a different reputation in the neighborhood.
Victor is a very nice guy.
He's doing a lot of
turning away from drugs, gangs, and violence, and turning on to the power of his words.
I have a choice. I write poetry.
If Victor is poetry in action, then 17-year-old Ashina McNeil is poetry in motion. She's wowing audiences at competitions called Poetry Slams, at places like the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in New York, by reciting poems that are brimming with attitude and soul.
I'm gonna dedicate this poem to today's youth that's filled to the brim with yesterday's lies about tomorrow's truth.
Ashina's poetry is often inspired by Harlem itself.
I love the realness of Harlem. Harlem is me, and that's my poetry.
She's even got one about 125th Street, Harlem's main drag.
These blues, these 125th Street blues, man, they just won't leave me alone. They become natural like that street corner that became your second home.
Ashina may soak up her inspiration on the street, but she does her writing underground on the subway.
Sometimes I'll just sit on the train and just write what I see. Not necessarily a poem, just write. A man with blue pants, a red hat, a little girl cries, her mother puts a pacifier in her mouth, and little by little that'll make a poem.
And that poem might just make its way onto a stage.
I've got the blues, baby, beyond anyone's belief. I mean, bullet blocking, shorty clocking, weave watching, pants look like they're dropping to the timberlands. On your feet.
And the Harlem beat goes on.
When a scandal hits the newspapers, there's nowhere to hide. And when that scandal involves the White House and the government, it can rock the whole country. That's what happened back in the 1970s, when two young reporters named Woodward and Bernstein broke the biggest scandal in U.S. history. How does the media affect how you see your government and your world? Here's a little lesson on the power of the press.
Bringing down the house.
It was the middle of the night on June 17, 1972, when police discovered a break-in at the Watergate building complex in Washington, D.C. 5 burglars were arrested for breaking into the offices of the Democratic Party. No one paid much attention to the crime, except for Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, 2 young reporters from the Washington Post newspaper. Woodward was new to the Post, and the experienced Bernstein wasn't sure he liked him. But they teamed up because they both suspected there was more to this story. When they dug deeper, a secret source in the government, known only as Deep Throat, told them to find out who paid the burglars. Promising to keep their sources secret, the reporters traced the money all the way to the White House. And they found proof that the Republicans in charge of President Nixon's re-election campaign had paid the burglars to spy on the Democrats. The Post printed it, TV News reported it, and President Nixon denied it.
I have never heard or seen such outrageous, vicious, distorted reporting in 27 years of public life.
President Nixon won the next election, but Woodward and Bernstein kept the heat on. They wrote a series of articles that rocked the country, exposing a web of lies and conspiracy at the highest levels of government.
Committee will come to order.
Within months, the U.S. Senate set up a committee to investigate the Watergate break-ins. 19 people who worked for President Nixon were found guilty of breaking the law. To avoid being impeached and thrown out of office himself, on August 9, 1974, Richard Nixon became the first U.S. president to quit his job.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Before Watergate, The press was pretty easy on presidents. But Woodward and Bernstein changed all that, inspiring journalists to work at keeping government honest. And by the way, if you really want to know who Deep Throat is, forget it. 30 years later, Woodward and Bernstein still hadn't revealed their source.
It's the one great secret in the whole world.
What can I say? Our next video is about one of the most amazing athletes of all time, cyclist Lance Armstrong. He's beaten all the odds, smashed all the records, and has a story so incredible he's written several books about it. These titles should give you a clue as to what Lance is all about. It's not about the bike, and every second counts. What makes an athlete a hero? Take a look and you decide.
Tour de Lance.
Competitive cycling is not as easy as riding a bike. Just ask the world's greatest bike racer, Lance Armstrong. It takes strength and endurance, and sometimes the road to victory is paved with obstacles. But Lance Armstrong makes obstacles look like speed bumps. By age 16, Lance was already a professional triathlete. That's 3 sports in one: swimming, running, and cycling. But he soon figured out that cycling was his destiny. At 25, Lance was a world champion bike racer, and it looked like nothing could stop him from capturing the sport's top prize, winning the roughly 2,300-mile Tour de France. But then, something did stop him: cancer. By the time he learned he had the disease, it had already spread to his lungs and his brain. Lance's doctors were not hopeful about his chances for survival.
I was scared because I didn't know anything about it. And I didn't know if I was going to live or die.
But Lance tackled cancer with the same determination he applied to his sport. Surgery and chemotherapy treatments left him weak, but he was barely out of his hospital bed when he was back in training. He lost his hair for a while, but he never lost his spirit, and within a year, he had won his fight against cancer. But did Lance still have the stamina to complete the 23-day Tour de France, the most challenging bike race in the world? It would be an uphill battle, literally. Lance was a great sprinter, but climbing had always been his weakness. And the race was full of grueling, steep inclines in the French Alps. Lance trained for months in those mountains, but when he started the race in July of '99, many doubted he would even finish.
Nobody expected me to win the Tour de France. Nobody expected me to do anything.
But Lance posted phenomenal times day after day of the race, attacking the mountains, pounding through freezing rain, and ultimately taking the lead all the way to Paris. And victory! And if you think that's impressive, Lance won the Tour de France again in 2000, 2001, 2002, and 2003, making him the only 5-time American winner ever. Lance is using his fame to help raise money for cancer research, and his story, which you can find in his best-selling book, has been an amazing inspiration to other cancer survivors. Lance believes anything's possible for people facing challenges, but as he says in his book, you have to believe and you have to fight. The fight paid off for Lance. He's not just a survivor, but a winner.
Hey, you rock this topic, and you're ready to rock another one. You rock!